This is the story of how General George S. Patton turned his enemy's own wisdom against them, and the astonishing discovery he made that would make him one of history's most formidable commanders. Stay with me until the end, because what Patton learned applies far beyond the battlefield, and you need to hear this. Before we dive in, I need you to do something important. Hit that subscribe button right now. We're racing toward a goal of 100 comments on this video, and we can't bring you more incredible stories like this without your support. Drop a comment below with your thoughts and stick around until the very end, because this story gets even more remarkable than you can imagine. The year was 1943, and American forces had just suffered one of their most humiliating defeats of the war. At a place called Kasserine Pass in the mountains of Tunisia, German tanks, under the command of the legendary Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, had torn through American lines like a hot knife through butter. Young American soldiers, many seeing combat for the first time, broke and ran. Equipment was abandoned, casualties mounted. The defeat sent shockwaves through Allied command, and urgent questions arose. Were American forces simply not ready to face the battle-hardened Germans? Could they ever hope to defeat an enemy with such tactical superiority? Into this crisis stepped a man who had been preparing for this exact moment his entire life. General George S. Patton, Jr. wasn't your typical military officer. While other commanders relied on standard training and battlefield experience, Patton had spent decades engaged in an obsessive pursuit that his peers often found peculiar. He collected books the way some men collected stamps. His personal library contained hundreds of volumes on military history, tactics, and strategy. But most unusual of all, he had devoted countless hours to studying the very men he would one day face in combat, the generals of Germany. "I have studied the German all my life," Patton declared before heading to North Africa. "I have read the memoirs of his generals and political leaders. I have studied in detail the accounts of every damned one of his battles. I know exactly how he will react under any given set of circumstances." It was an audacious claim, but Patton wasn't bluffing. His preparation went far deeper than anyone realized. During the 1930s, when most officers were simply going through the motions of peacetime military service, Patton was devouring German military literature in translation. Over one Christmas holiday, while other families gathered around trees and exchanged gifts, Patton sat in his study, reading Hans von Seeckt's memoirs. Von Seeckt had been Chief of Staff of the German 11th Army during World War I, and later became the architect of the post-war German military. The book detailed tactical innovations, leadership principles, and the German military mindset. But Patton didn't stop there. He read Adolf von Schell's Battle Leadership, a slim volume that had become required reading at American military schools. Von Schell, a German captain during World War I, had come to Fort Benning to lecture American officers on combat psychology and small unit tactics. His insights into how men behaved under fire, how to prepare troops psychologically for battle, and how to lead in rapidly changing situations fascinated Patton. He took extensive notes, underlining passages, writing thoughts in the margins. Most famously, Patton studied Erwin Rommel's infantry attacks, a detailed account of Rommel's experiences as a young officer in World War I. The book laid out Rommel's tactics of speed, deception, and deep penetration into enemy territory. Rommel described how small units of shock troops could surprise and overwhelm larger forces through audacity and rapid movement. Every page offered insights into how one of Germany's most brilliant tactical minds approached warfare. But here's what most people don't understand about Patton's studying. He wasn't just memorizing tactics or collecting trivia. He was searching for something deeper, something that would give him an almost supernatural advantage over his opponents. And in those German books, scattered across hundreds of pages, he found it. The secret was a concept the Germans called Auftragstaktik, often translated as mission-type orders or directive command. It was a fundamentally different philosophy of leadership than what most armies practiced. In traditional military hierarchies, commanders gave detailed, explicit orders. They told subordinates exactly what to do and how to do it. Every action was prescribed, every movement planned from above. This created armies that could execute predetermined plans with mechanical precision, but it also created armies that couldn't adapt when those plans fell apart. The German system was radically different. Instead of giving detailed orders, German commanders told their subordinates what needed to be accomplished, but left it to them to determine how. A German general might tell a tank commander, "Take that town by nightfall." How the commander did it, what route he took, what tactics he used, all of that was left to his judgment. This approach assumed that the officer on the ground, seeing the situation firsthand, could make better decisions than a general miles away, looking at a map. Patton absorbed this principle completely. He had a famous saying, "Never tell people how to do things, tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity." Another Patton maxim echoed German thinking perfectly. The tactics belong to battalion commanders. If generals knew less tactics, they would interfere less. This wasn't just theory for Patton. He put it into practice relentlessly. He would send staff officers to the front lines to monitor progress, and often went himself to see situations firsthand, but he didn't micromanage. He trusted his commanders to execute. This created a Third Army that could move with unprecedented speed and flexibility, adapting to opportunities as they arose, exploiting weaknesses the moment they appeared. But the Germans had taught Patton something even more fundamental: the absolute necessity of offensive action and movement. The German military, traumatized by the static horror of World War I's trench warfare, had become obsessed with mobility and the offensive. They had carefully studied the early blitzkrieg campaigns against Poland and France, analyzing what made them successful. The answer was always the same: relentless forward momentum, giving the enemy no time to recover or reorganize. Patton took this lesson to heart with almost religious fervor. "Always take the offensive, never dig in," became his motto. He expressed his contempt for defensive positions in graphic terms. Once finding slit trenches dug around a command post, Patton asked the commanding officer to show him his trench, then promptly urinated in it. The message was clear: Patton's army didn't hide in holes. When Patton took command of American forces in North Africa after the disaster at Kasserine Pass, he immediately began applying everything he had learned from his German teachers. He knew from Rommel's own writing that proper defensive preparation was crucial. "Too much spade work is better than too little. Sweat saves blood," Rommel had written, so Patton had his men dig in thoroughly at a place called El Guettar, creating a defensive position that would be held to assault. But Patton also knew that defense alone wasn't enough. He organized his infantry, armor, and artillery into a unified combat operation, ensuring that all elements supported each other. This was another principle he had gleaned from German doctrine: combined arms warfare, where different types of units work in seamless coordination. As Patton himself wrote, "To achieve harmony in battle, each weapon must support the other. Team play wins." When Rommel's Afrika Korps attacked at El Guettar, they ran into a buzzsaw. The same German forces that had routed the Americans at Kasserine Pass now found themselves stopped cold. American artillery devastated German tank formations. Infantry held firm. The counterattack never materialized. Patton had beaten Rommel at his own game, using principles drawn from Rommel's own book. But the victory at El Guettar was just the beginning. As Patton moved through Sicily and then into France, He continued to apply German tactical principles, often more aggressively than the Germans themselves. The Third Army became famous for its incredible speed. After breaking out from Normandy, Patton's forces raced across France so fast that maps couldn't keep up. Supply officers struggled to deliver fuel and ammunition to units that were hundreds of miles ahead of schedule. Patton understood something that some of his contemporaries didn't. In modern warfare, speed itself was a weapon. Every hour you gave the enemy to reorganize was an hour they could bring up reserves, dig in, prepare defenses. But if you kept moving, kept hitting them before they could recover, you could achieve victories far beyond what static warfare ever could. This was pure German doctrine, the lessons of blitzkrieg applied by an American general. The Germans themselves noticed. After the war, when Allied intelligence officers interviewed captured German commanders, many of them spoke of Patton with grudging respect. General Günther Blumentritt, who had helped plan the invasions of Poland and France, said the Germans regarded Patton as the most aggressive armored general of the Allies, noting that his operations came closest to the German concept of the classical military commander. Even Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare, acknowledged Patton's skill, saying that from the standpoint of a tank specialist, Patton had acted exactly as Guderian himself would have done. But here's the fascinating twist to this story. While Patton was busy studying the Germans and learning their methods, the Germans themselves barely noticed him for most of the war. When Patton first took command in North Africa, German intelligence reports didn't even mention him by name. During the Sicily campaign, German commanders viewed the operation as unremarkable. A German general later described American tactics under Patton as cautious and systematic, not at all the lightning warfare Patton aspired to. This disconnect between Patton's reputation and German perceptions reveals something important. Patton had indeed learned the secrets of German tactical thinking, but applying those lessons against an enemy that invented them was incredibly difficult. The Germans had been refining these concepts for decades, fighting massive battles on the Eastern Front against Soviet forces. They had experience that no amount of reading could replicate. What Patton really achieved was something more subtle and more important than simply copying German tactics. He took the best ideas from German military thinking and adapted them to American strengths. The United States had advantages Germany lacked: overwhelming industrial capacity, reliable logistics, air superiority. Patton combined German tactical principles with American material advantages to create something uniquely effective. Consider the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West. When German forces punched through American lines in the Ardennes forest, creating chaos and threatening to split the Allied armies, Eisenhower called a meeting of his commanders. He asked who could counterattack. Patton, who had been following events closely, said he could have 3 divisions attacking north in 48 hours. The other generals were stunned. Turning an entire army 90 degrees in the middle of winter over icy roads with minimal preparation time seemed impossible. But Patton had already done the planning. He had anticipated this might happen, had prepared contingency orders, had positioned his forces for maximum flexibility. This was Ofträg's tactic in action. Patton told his staff what needed to happen, and they made it work. True to his word, Patton's Third Army pivoted north and slammed into the southern flank of the German penetration. The attack helped stabilize the situation and eventually drove the Germans back. It was one of the most remarkable logistical and tactical achievements of the war, and it came directly from Patton's understanding of mobile warfare and decentralized command. Throughout the campaign in Europe, Patton continued to push his forces harder and faster than any other Allied commander. When Eisenhower's chief of staff told Patton not to attempt the capture of the city of Trier because it would require 4 divisions, Patton's response was legendary. He sent a message: "Have taken Trier with 2 divisions. What do you want me to do? Give it back?" This wasn't arrogance, though Patton certainly had plenty of that. It was the confidence that came from understanding modern mobile warfare at a deeper level than most of his contemporaries. But Patton's obsession with studying his enemies went beyond just German military texts. He read the Quran before deploying to North Africa, trying to understand the cultural context he would be fighting in. Before the Normandy invasion, he read about Caesar's Gallic campaigns and William the Conqueror's battles, drawing insights from commanders who had fought in the same terrain centuries earlier. Even at the end of his life, paralyzed after a car accident in late 1945, Patton asked his wife Beatrice to read to him from the memoirs of one of Napoleon's generals. This voracious appetite for knowledge, this refusal to ever stop learning, was perhaps Patton's greatest secret. While the specific tactics he learned from German generals were important, what mattered more was his approach, the willingness to learn from anyone, including enemies, and the intellectual humility to recognize that others might have insights worth studying. There's a broader lesson here that extends far beyond World War II. Patton understood something that remains true today. Your competitors, your opponents, even your enemies can be your greatest teachers if you're willing to learn from them. Instead of dismissing German military thinking because it came from the enemy, Patton studied it obsessively. Instead of assuming American methods were inherently superior, he looked for ways to improve them by incorporating the best ideas from abroad. This approach requires a particular kind of courage. It's easy to study people you admire, to learn from those on your own side. It's much harder to acknowledge that those you oppose might have something valuable to teach you. It requires setting aside ego and national pride in pursuit of effectiveness. Patton managed this better than almost any commander of his era. The irony is that while Patton learned extensively from German generals, they spent relatively little time studying him. German intelligence reports from early in the war barely mention Patton. Even when he commanded the Third Army, German commanders often underestimated him, describing his tactics as timid or systematic. They failed to recognize that they were facing an opponent who understood their own doctrine as well as they did. This was Patton's ultimate advantage. He knew them, but they didn't know him. He had read their books, studied their battles, internalized their principles. They saw just another Allied general. When Patton attacked, he could anticipate their responses because he understood how they thought. They couldn't anticipate his moves because they hadn't done the same homework. In the final analysis, what Patton learned from studying German generals wasn't any single tactic or technique. It was a comprehensive philosophy of warfare built on speed, aggression, flexibility, and decentralized command. It was an understanding that modern combat rewarded those who could move faster and adapt quicker than their opponents. It was the recognition that detailed planning mattered less than rapid execution, and that giving capable subordinates freedom of action produced better results than micromanagement. These principles, drawn from German military thinking but filtered through Patton's unique personality and American material advantages, made him one of the most effective combat commanders of World War II. His Third Army covered more ground, liberated more territory, and inflicted more casualties on German forces than any comparable Allied unit. By the war's end, German soldiers spoke of fighting Patton's forces with a respect they rarely accorded other American units. But perhaps the most important thing Patton learned was something he articulated in a speech in 1926, long before World War II. We must live not in our studies. We must guard against becoming so engrossed in the specific nature of the roots and bark of the trees of knowledge as to miss the meaning and grandeur of the forests they compose. In other words, don't just memorize facts. Understand principles. Don't just learn tactics. Grasp the underlying philosophy that makes those tactics work. This is why Patton could adapt German ideas to American circumstances. He hadn't just memorized what Rommel or von Seeckt wrote. He understood why they wrote it, what problems they were trying to solve, what assumptions underlay their thinking. That deeper understanding allowed him to take their ideas and make them his own, modified for different circumstances and different strengths. The secret that Patton learned from studying German generals wasn't really a secret at all. It was hiding in plain sight, available to anyone willing to do the work. Other Allied commanders could have read the same books Patton read. Some probably did. But Patton approached that reading differently. He didn't just want to know what German generals did. He wanted to understand how they thought. He wanted to see the battlefield through their eyes so that when he finally faced them in combat, he would know them better than they knew themselves. And that made all the difference. When Patton's tanks rolled across France in the summer of 1944, when they pivoted to relieve Bastogne in the winter, when they crossed the Rhine in the spring of 1945, they did so with a speed and decisiveness that embodied everything Patton had learned from decades of study. The German generals who had written the books Patton studied found themselves outmaneuvered by a student who had learned their lessons well, perhaps too well. In the end, Patton proved that knowledge is power, that understanding your enemy is as important as understanding yourself, and that the willingness to learn from anyone, anywhere, can make the difference between victory and defeat. His story reminds us that the greatest warriors are also scholars, that the most dangerous opponents are those who never stop learning, and that sometimes the best secrets are the ones written down for anyone to read, if only they have the wisdom to study them. The secret that Patton learned wasn't hidden in some classified document or whispered in a darkened room. It was published in books, taught in military schools, discussed openly by the very men who would become his enemies. Patton's genius was recognizing the value of that knowledge and having the discipline to absorb it completely. Where others saw words on a page, Patton saw the keys to victory. Where others read casually, Patton studied obsessively. And when the time came to put that knowledge into action, he was ready in a way few commanders in history have ever been ready. That's the real secret. There are no shortcuts to excellence, no substitutes for preparation, and no replacement for the hard work of truly understanding your craft. Patton spent decades preparing for a war that hadn't started yet, studying enemies he hadn't met, learning lessons that wouldn't pay off for years. When his moment came, he was ready. That's the secret. That's always been the secret. The question is, are you willing to do the work? Now I want to hear from you. What's your biggest takeaway from Patton's approach to studying his enemies? Do you think this kind of intellectual preparation still matters in modern warfare, or has technology changed everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want, tell me from which part of the world you're watching this video. Your comment matters, and I want to read it and reply. For more exciting stories like this one, click on the video appearing on your screen right now.